Good morning, students. Today we are going to continue Chapter 4 Challenges to Indian Democracy. And in this module, I will discuss JP movement with you. Let us first understand the objective of the topic. The first objective is to understand the role of syndicate or new leaders and factionalism, that is division, in the Congress. The next objective is to discuss the Naxal movement, which was started by peasants against the wrong policies of government. The next objective is to understand the JP movement or movement started by Jai Prakash Narayan. And lastly, we will discuss the declaration of emergency declared by Mrs. Indira Gandhi in 1975 to 77. We have already discussed the role of syndicate and factionalism in the Congress and the Naxal movement in the last module. Students, on the basis of the Naxal movement, you must understand these questions and answer these questions. What was the Naxalite problem? The next question is, why did the movement start at Naxalbari area of West Bengal? The next question is, what were the causes for the rise of Naxalite movement? Question number 4. Mention the content of the 5th and the 9th schedule of the Constitution of India. And lastly, discuss the government measures to suppress the Naxalite movement. In this module, we are going to discuss the JP movement or movement started by Jai Prakash Narayan, which changed the Indian politics. So let us understand the JP movement, which started in 1974 and lasted till 1975. First, we will discuss the new terms of this topic. The first new term is JP movement. JP movement or the Bihar movement was a political movement initiated by students in the Indian state of Bihar in 1974 and led by the veteran Gandhian socialist Jai Prakash Narayan, popularly known as JP. It was against misrule and corruption in the state government. So basically, JP movement was started in Bihar against the malpractices of Bihar government in 1974, and it was led by the Gandhian socialist who followed Gandhian ideology, Jai Prakash Narayan. And that is the reason it is also called as JP movement. The next word is Nav Nirman Movement. Nav Nirman Andolan, reinvention or reconstruction movement, was a socio-political movement in 1974 in Gujarat by students and middle-class people against the economic crisis and corruption in public life. It is the only successful agitation in the history of post-independence India that resulted in dissolution of an elected government of the state. After the independence of India, the Nav Nirman movement was the only successful movement which was started by middle class and students against the poor economic condition of the peasants and the other people in their state. It was so successful that the elected government has to bow before this movement and resign, and as a result, the state legislative assembly was dissolved. The next word is Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad. Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad or ABVP is a right-wing all India student organization affiliated to Hindu nationalist Rashtriya Swamsevak Sangh. They claim themselves to be India's largest student organization with more than 3 million members. So ABVP or Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad is the wing which is associated with RSS or Rashtriya Swamsevak Sangh, and it worked for the welfare of the students of India. The next word is All India Students Federation or AISF. The All India Students Federation is the oldest student organization in India. It was founded on 12th August 1936 with the guidance of freedom fighters and revolutionaries of that time. The main reason for forming AISF was to strengthen the national movement in India so that students can also take part in the national struggle against the British government. The next word is Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti or BCSS. When the Nav Nirman Movement resulted in the forced resignation of the Gujarat government, students' protest had already begun in Bihar. They formed Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti or BCSS to spearhead the agitation. Lalu Prasad Yadav was chosen as the president of this organization. Getting inspiration from the success of Nav Nirman movement in Gujarat, which forced the elected government to resign, students in Bihar have formed Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti or BCSS to start the movement against the state government. Lalu Prasad Yadav, who is a very active politician nowadays, he started his political career as the president of this organization. The next word is total revolution or Sampurna Kranti. The concept of total revolution as enunciated or expressed clearly by Jayaprakash Narayan is a combination of his ideas on 7 revolutions, that is social, economic, political, cultural, ideological and intellectual, educational as well as spiritual. So total revolution was a concept given by Jayaprakash Narayan which involved that there should be total changes in every sphere of India. It would involve economy, politics, culture, intellectual education as well as ideology. Jayaprakash Narayan launched total revolution as Indira Gandhi was found guilty of violating electoral laws by the Allahabad High Court. Narayan called for Indira and the CMs to resign and the military and police to disregard unconstitutional and immoral orders. He advocated a program of social transformation which he called Sampurna Kranti or total revolution. Students in 1975, Allahabad High Court declared that Mrs. Indira Gandhi, while contesting in the election, has done wrong practices and that is the reason she should resign from her post. When she refused to resign, Jayaprakash Narayan started a movement against it called as Sampurna Kranti or total revolution. He asked all the law and authority agencies like military and police not to accept the wrong orders of the government. Next word is national emergency. It could be declared on the basis of war or internal disturbances or external aggression in the whole of India. So national emergency can be declared in India under Article 352 if there is a condition of war or internal disturbances means civil war or any part of India or entire India is threatened by some foreign aggression. Such kind of emergency can only be declared by the President on the basis of a written request by the Cabinet which is headed by the Prime Minister. Constitutionally, national emergency can be declared by the President, but he is not free to declare national emergency. President can only declare national emergency on the written appeal or request of the Cabinet Minister. And here, the Cabinet Minister head is Prime Minister. So indirectly, President can declare the national emergency only and only on the written request of Prime Minister and his team. The next word is Janata Party. The Janata Party, JP or People's Party, was a political party that was founded as an amalgam or joining of Indian political parties opposed to the emergency that was imposed between 1975 to 1977 by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi of Indian National Congress. Janata Party was the merger of Indian National Congress, Bharatiya Lok Dal, Bharatiya Jansangh. Janata Party was formed in 1977 in India. It formed due to declaration of emergency and wrong policies of Mrs. Indira Gandhi's government. It was an amalgamation or joining of different political parties which included Bharatiya Lok Dal and Bharatiya Jansangh. Now students, let us discuss the origin of the JP movement or Jayaprakash Narayan's movement. The year 1974 is very important in the history of India. During this time, a movement started in Gujarat known as Nav Nirman Movement against the Gujarat government. The Nav Nirman Movement ultimately forced the Gujarat government to resign from power. Students, I have already discussed with you in the new terms about the Nav Nirman Movement that it was the only successful movement which was launched after independence in India. It was basically led by the middle class people and the students against the poor economic condition of Gujarat after independence. The movement was very successful and it forced the elected government to resign. Similarly, a Bihar movement started by the students in 1974. The lead was given by veteran Gandhian socialist Jai Prakash Narayan, popularly known as JP. It was against misrule and corruption in the government of Bihar. Getting motivation by the success of Nav Nirman movement, the students of Bihar organized themselves under the leadership of Jai Prakash Narayan. A movement was started in 1974 which was led by Jai Prakash Narayan, who was the follower of Mahatma Gandhi and advocated socialist society. This movement was also called as the JP movement. It was basically started against the wrong policies and corruption which was prevalent in the Bihar government. Unlike a Nav Nirman movement, political students outfits like Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, ABVP, connected with the Jan Sangh. Samajwadi Yuvan Sabha or SYS connected with the Samajwadi Party and Lok Dal took active participation. All India Students Federation AISF connected with CPI was also involved. In the Nav Nirman movement, student organizations were not involved. But in the Bihar movement or JP movement, many students organizations were involved, like Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, which was associated with Jan Sangh, took an active part in the Bihar movement or JP movement. Apart from this, Samajwadi Yuvan Sabha, which was a right wing of Samajwadi Party, and Lok Dal also actively took part in this movement. All India Students Federation or AISF, which was a student union of Communist Party of India, was also very active in this movement. Now let us discuss the main features of this movement. Opposite parties, excluding the Congress, called for a statewide strike right from 1973. This was followed by police firing at Bhopal, the capital of Madhya Pradesh. 8 youth students were killed on 17 August 1973 for their participation in the JP movement. Right from the beginning of 1973, all the opposition parties asked the people to go for statewide strike. Firing was done by police in Bhopal. 8 youth students were killed on 17th of August 1973 because they have actively took part in the Jai Prakash Narayan movement. This shows that the government had taken stern measures to end the JP movement or Bihar movement. On 18 February 1974, Patna University Students' Union organized a convention which invited student leaders from whole state. They formed Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti or BCSS to spearhead the agitation. Lalu Prasad Yadav was chosen as the president of this organization. Their demands were related to education and food in hostels. On 18 February 1974, the students of Patna University organized themselves and formed BCSS to start their protest. Lalu Prasad Yadav, who was an active member of Student Union, was chosen as the president of BCSS. The demand of the BCSS was related to quality of education and food which was provided in the hostels of the university. Now let us discuss the course of the movement or what actually happened during JP movement. BCSS called for a Gherav at Bihar Legislative Assembly during the budget session on 18th March 1974. They blocked all the roads to the assembly and damaged the government properties, including the telephone exchange and the residence of the former Education Minister Ramanand Singh, which was set on fire. Chief Minister Abdul Ghaffur convinced the students that he would look into the matter. The BCSS or Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti started their agitation or protest with Gherao at Bihar Legislative Assembly. That means they came in huge number before Bihar Legislative Assembly. They blocked all the roads which were going to assembly and damaged the government property in order to make the government aware about their problems. They damaged telephone exchange, and the residence of the former Education Minister was set on fire so that he could realize the problem of the students. The Chief Minister of the state, Abdul Ghaffur, convinced the students that their problems would be solved by the state government. But the students at colleges and universities kept on protesting. 3 students died in the police firing in Patna. This provoked students across Bihar. BCSS declared a statewide strike on 23rd March. Meanwhile, JP visited Gujarat to witness the Nav Nirman Movement and declared his intention to lead the movement. In spite of the fact that the Chief Minister of Bihar had promised the students to solve the problem, students still carried on their protest. 3 students died in police firing in Patna, which provoked the students to increase their movement level. BCSS or Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti declared a statewide strike on 23rd March. This was a time that Jayaprakash Narayan visited Gujarat to see the success of Nav Nirman Movement and declared that he wanted to lead the protest started by BCSS. That means the movement started as Bihar Movement in the beginning, where the students have organized themselves into BCSS or Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti, which was led by Lalu Prasad Yadav. When police started violence attack against the students, then Jayaprakash Narayan joined this movement and provided leadership to this movement. And then after, this movement came to be known as JP Movement or Jayaprakash Narayan Movement. The BCSS approached JP to lead the agitation and he agreed. On 1 April 1974, Indira Gandhi attacked JP for demanding the outcast of elected government. A silent procession of 10,000 students was held in Patna. On 12 April 1974, 12 agitators died in police firing at Gaya while they tried to paralyze the government program. On joining the Bihar movement, Jayaprakash Narayan asked the elected governments to resign because they were not providing effective rule. Mrs. Indira Gandhi criticized Jayaprakash Narayan for asking the elected governments which were chosen by the people to resign. A silent procession was also held by 10,000 students in Patna. But this movement was provoked further when 12 agitators died in police firing at Gaya. The students strongly demanded dissolution of Bihar Legislative Assembly. During May 1974, various students and people's organizations kept demanding the dissolution of the Bihar Assembly and tried for forced resignation but failed. JP now told the people at Patna rally to organize a protest in the Bihar Legislative Assembly. Now the demand of the people was that the Bihar government should resign themselves. They were asking for the dissolution of the Bihar Legislative Assembly, which was not accepted to the Bihar government. Jayaprakash Narayan started his famous protest rally, Gherao Bihar Legislative Assembly, where many students have actively took part. Here, outside the Bihar Legislative Assembly, he advocated a program of social transformation by the participation of the youths in social activities. He called it Total Revolution Movement or Sampurna Kranti. Protest and closure of number of students appeared in the examination. Jayaprakash Narayan asked for total transformation of society and asked the youth to actively take part in it. He has named this movement as Total Revolution Movement or Sampurna Kranti, where changes would be there in every sphere of society. Many of the students, they boycotted examination and many left the colleges and universities. The movement now started demanding resignation of the MLAs similarly as the Nav Nirman Movement. But this move failed as 42 out of 318 MLA had resigned and a number of MLA refused to resign. Like in the Nav Nirman Movement, the state government had to resign. Similarly, Bihar students also started demanding for the resignation of the MLAs of Bihar government. But this was not successful in Bihar because out of 318 members of Legislative Assembly of Bihar, only 42 resigned, rest all refused to resign. Administration now took strong measures to stop people from reaching Patna for any movement. At a massive gathering at Patna, JP appealed to the people to outcast the Congress government of Indira Gandhi. Mrs. Indira Gandhi decided to drag this conflict to the election arena. She did not want to dissolve the Bihar Legislative Assembly like the Gujarat Assembly. The government took strong measures to suppress the JP movement. The students were not allowed to reach Patna. Violent activities were done against the students. Jayaprakash Narayan asked the people to boycott and strongly criticized the Congress government, which was led by Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Mrs. Indira Gandhi took this issue to the election area. She did not want Bihar Assembly to resign like Gujarat Legislative Assembly because if they resign, it would mean the defeat of Congress party against every political movement. JP realized the importance of fighting within the democratic system rather than by a partyless democracy which he had followed so long. As Mrs. Indira Gandhi challenged JP Narayan in the next general election, so he thought that he would also set up a democratic system rather than just protesting by rallies. He appealed to the opposition parties, which finally led to the formation of Janata Party. The movement turned into Satyagrah and volunteers kept protesting at Bihar Legislative Assembly, inviting arrest. Jayaprakash Narayan appealed to all political parties to come together and form Janata Party. So Janata Party was formed in 1977 and it was amalgamation of 4 big political parties. The movement turned into Satyagrah. Volunteers were standing outside Bihar Legislative Assembly and asking the police to arrest them. JP now started traveling all across the country for strengthening and uniting the opposition parties to the defeat of the Congress. The election in Gujarat was delayed until Morarji Desai went on a hunger strike demanding elections. Elections was held on 12th June 1975 in which Congress lost. JP worked for the consolidation of opposition parties so that one opposition front can be formed to defeat the Congress party. JP asked all the opposition parties to join hands so that Congress could be defeated. Realizing that Congress could be defeated in the state legislative elections of Gujarat, Congress decided to delay the election for some time. Morarji Desai went on hunger strikes, so elections were held on 12th June 1975, and in these elections, Congress lost badly. The same day, Allahabad High Court declared Indira Gandhi's election to the Lok Sabha void on ground of electoral malpractice. The High Court then ordered to remove her from seat in the parliament and banned her from election for 6 years. But Indira Gandhi ignored the order and moved to the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, when all the opposition parties were gathering themselves against Congress, Allahabad High Court declared a historical judgment in which it declared that in the election of Lok Sabha, Mrs. Indira Gandhi has resorted to malpractices. So she should be removed from her seat in the parliament and she should not be allowed to fight in the election for next 6 years. Mrs. Indira Gandhi did not accept this verdict given by Allahabad High Court and appealed against this judgment in the Supreme Court of India. JP opposed her move in his letter to Indira Gandhi and called her to resign. In this situation, Indira Gandhi imposed a nationwide emergency on the night of 25 June 1975 to safeguard her position. JP opposition leaders like Kriplani, Morarji Desai, Raj Narayan, Charan Singh, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Lal Krishna Advani and others were arrested. When opposition parties headed by JP asked for resignation of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, she declared national emergency on 25th June 1975 in order to safeguard her position as the Prime Minister of India. All the opposition leaders, which included the big leaders of that time, Jayaprakash Narayan, Morarji Desai, Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Lal Krishna Advani were arrested and put behind the bar. Dissenting members of our own party were also immediately arrested. Opposition political organizations such as Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS and the Communist Party of India Marxist were banned and their leaders were arrested. Only the Communist Party of India supported the state of emergency. All the political parties which were opposed to Congress, they were banned and their leaders were put behind the bar. The press was censored. JP was kept as detained at Chandigarh. His health deteriorated and was admitted to Jaslok Hospital at Bombay. It was revealed that his kidney was not functioning properly. Now let us discuss what was the impact of the Jayaprakash Narayan movement on Indian politics. After Indira Gandhi revoked the emergency on 21 March 1977 and announced elections, it was under JP's guidance that the Janata Party was formed with 4 opposition parties, the Congress O, the Jansangh, Bharatiya Lok Dal and the Socialist Party. The Janata Party was then voted into power and became the first non-Congress party to form a government at centre in India. The most important result of JP movement was that it forced the Prime Minister of India to end the emergency and resigned. And in the election, first time a non-Congress party came into form, and that was the Janata Party, which was a merger of 4 political parties: Congress O, Jansangh, Bharatiya Lok Dal and the Socialist Party. So formation of first ever non-Congress government at the central level was the biggest achievement of JP movement. These are the objectives we have covered in this topic. In day 1, we have discussed the role of syndicate and factionalism in the Congress. Factionalism means division of Congress into 2 parts. We have also discussed emergence of many regional parties other than Congress. Then we have discussed the importance of elections of 1967, that no doubt Congress was victorious in the Lok Sabha election, but it got 70 seats less than as compared to 1964 elections. In 8 state legislative elections, Congress had to face defeat. And then we have discussed, because of this poor result, Congress was divided into 2 factions. Congress O, which was earlier led by K.K. Kamraj and then by Morarji Desai. And the second group was Congress R, which later became Congress I, and it was under the leadership of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. In day 2, we have discussed the background of the Naxal movement, which was a peasant movement against the wealthy peasants and the government. This movement was started in Andhra Pradesh. Then we have discussed the causes of its rise, where we have discussed that the land was not equally divided among the peasants, and that was the main reason for starting the Naxal movement. We have discussed its main leaders. Kanu Sanyal, Charu Majumdar were the main leaders of the Naxal movement. And then we have discussed the steps taken by the government to suppress the Naxal movement. Large number of Naxalites were arrested and many of them were killed. The government also took the help of military to resort law and order. In this module, we have discussed JP movement, which was also called as Jai Prakash Narayan movement. The other name of this movement was Bihar movement. Then we have discussed its origin. It was basically originated by the students of Bihar by forming Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti, and later on Jai Prakash Narayan gave its leadership. That's why it was called as JP movement. The basic reason of starting this movement was that the students were not happy with the corruption in Bihar government. Then we have discussed the main features of the JP movement, that this movement stood for Total Revolution Movement or Sampurna Kranti of society from every perspective, be it social, political, economic, cultural, educational or intellectual. And then we have discussed course of the movement, where we have discussed that students of Bihar under the leadership of JP Narayan surrounded Bihar Legislative Assembly and asked for resignation of the MLAs of Bihar. They also strongly criticized the performance of the Congress party under the leadership of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. The movement became more popular when Allahabad High Court in its historical verdict declared that Mrs. Indira Gandhi should be banned from electing in the Lok Sabha for next 6 years and should be expelled from the membership of parliament as she was involved in corrupt activities during the election of Lok Sabha. Here we have also discussed that when Mrs. Indira Gandhi was facing severe criticism from JP Narayan, she declared national emergency in order to safeguard her position. And then finally, we have discussed the impact of this movement. Due to the public pressure and pressure exerted by JP movement, national emergency was cancelled by Mrs. Gandhi, and she was also forced to resign by the opposition parties. The Janata Party was formed, which was the amalgamation of 4 opposition parties, and this party became the first ever non-Congress party to rule India. Students, we have covered these questions in this module. The first question is, who was known as JP in the Indian politics? The second question is, what was the JP movement? The third question is, what were the aims of the JP movement? The next question is, why was the Bihar Chhatra Sangharsh Samiti founded? The next one is, what do you mean by total revolution or Sampurna learning? The last question is, what was the historic judgment of the Allahabad High Court related to Indira Gandhi's election to Lok Sabha? If you want to explore more on this topic, there is a YouTube link you can see on your screen. You can click this link. With the help of this explanation and internet, you are advised to make notes of this chapter. We'll meet you in next session. Till then, have a nice day.